The envelope appeared between the wine glasses and dessert plates like it had been planned all along. My brother-in-law Stephen pushed it across the polished wood table with 2 fingers, casual, like he was passing the salt. Inside was a check, and judging by his expression, he thought it solved everything. What Stephen didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the man they'd spent 4 years dismissing as simple and naive held enough voting shares in his hospitality empire to remove him from his own boardroom before breakfast tomorrow. 4 years ago, I met Helen at a community fundraiser. She was there volunteering, organizing donated items for families in need. I was there because I actually cared about the cause, not because it looked good on a social calendar. We started talking over boxes of children's books, and she made me laugh with her honest observations about the event's overly complicated seating chart. When I asked for her number, she warned me up front. My family's intense about success and appearances. If that's going to be an issue, we should probably just stay friends. I told her the truth, or at least part of it. Success means different things to different people. I measure mine by whether I can sleep at night knowing I did the right thing. 3 months later, I proposed. 6 months after that, we got married in a small ceremony that her family barely tolerated. Her brother Stephen gave a toast that barely concealed his disappointment. Helen's parents, Carl and Eleanor, smiled through gritted teeth as their daughter married someone they considered catastrophically beneath her potential. What they saw was a financial consultant who drove a practical sedan and lived in a comfortable but unremarkable house. What they didn't see was the network of investment entities I'd built over 15 years, quietly acquiring distressed assets in industries I understood deeply. 8 years before I met Helen, her brother's hotel chain was hemorrhaging money after aggressive expansion during a market downturn. Traditional investors wouldn't touch it. So I did, through a holding company so layered and anonymous that Stephen never questioned where the capital injections were coming from when he desperately needed them. I saved his company 3 times. 3 separate instances where Stephen Hill hotels would have collapsed without the mysterious institutional investor who kept buying bonds and equity when everyone else was running. And through it all, Stephen treated me like I couldn't possibly understand business at his level. Family dinners became performances where he'd explain hospitality industry basics to me, his voice dripping with condescension, while I nodded along and asked simple questions that made him feel brilliant. Helen saw it happening, but didn't know how to stop it. She'd pull me aside after dinners, apologizing for her family's behavior. "You don't have to take this," she'd say, frustration evident in every word. "You don't have to keep coming to these things." But I did have to come. I needed to see exactly who these people were when they thought they had all the power. I needed to know if there was anything genuine beneath the performance, any capacity for humility or growth. Tonight's dinner was giving me that answer in the most spectacular way possible. The invitation came Tuesday morning. "Stephen wants us for dinner Friday," Helen told me, tension tightening her shoulders. "Just immediate family. He says it's important." Important in the Hill family meant Stephen had decided something and expected everyone else to fall in line. Helen's younger sister Florence would be there with her husband, acting as supporting cast for whatever Stephen had planned. Carl and Eleanor would anchor the table, providing generational authority to Stephen's pronouncements. "I should cancel," Helen said, already reaching for her phone. "When Stephen gets formal like this, it never ends well." "We're going," I told her, keeping my voice level. "I want to see what he's planning." What I didn't say was that I already knew. My attorney had mentioned unusual activity around my holdings in Stephen Hill hotels. Someone had been asking questions about the ownership structure, trying to trace back through the corporate layers to find out who really controlled that 51% voting bloc. Stephen had finally gotten curious about his mysterious benefactor, but he'd done it too late and incompletely. Friday arrived with October cold that made Chicago feel particularly unforgiving. Helen changed outfits twice before settling on something that walked the line between respecting her family's formality and not trying too hard to impress them. I wore slacks and a sweater, the uniform of acceptable mediocrity they expected. Stephen's penthouse occupied the top floor of one of his own hotels in the Gold Coast, a monument to the success I'd helped him achieve. The private elevator opened directly into his home, all floor-to-ceiling windows and designer furniture that screamed expensive without saying anything interesting. Eleanor greeted us at the door, her embrace of Helen careful not to disturb her makeup. She acknowledged me with a tight smile and my first name, nothing more. Carl was already positioned by the windows, drink in hand, surveying his son's domain with obvious pride. Florence and her husband Elijah sat on the leather sofa, playing their parts in the family tableau. Dinner was catered, naturally. Stephen didn't cook, Helen had told me once. He had people for that. The dining table could seat 12, but tonight held only 7, an intimate gathering by Hill family standards. Stephen held court at the head, discussing a new property acquisition in Miami with the kind of detail designed to impress rather than inform. I asked a few basic questions, let him explain concepts I'd understood for 20 years, watched him glow with the satisfaction of educating someone he considered financially illiterate. Then dessert arrived, and with it, the envelope. Stephen slid it across to me with theatrical timing. I think we should talk about something that's been on all our minds, he began, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he probably used in acquisitions. We've been patient, understanding even. But Helen deserves better than struggling financially because of misguided loyalty. Helen's hand found mine under the table, squeezing hard. Stephen, what are you doing? I haven't even opened it yet, I said calmly, picking up the envelope. Maybe I should see what we're discussing? Inside was a check for $750,000 and a set of legal documents. I scanned them quickly. Annulment papers, clean and simple, dissolving our marriage as if it never happened. The check was paper-clipped to a letter explaining the terms. Sign the documents, take the money, disappear from Helen's life. Everyone wins, Stephen's letter concluded, except he'd phrased it like a business proposal, as if my marriage was a failed venture he was graciously buying out. This is more than you'd earn in a decade, Stephen said, confidence radiating from every word. You'd be set up better than you were before you met Helen. She could move on to someone more appropriate to her background, someone who can actually provide the life she deserves. Helen stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood. You can't be serious. You're trying to buy my husband like he's some kind of gold digger? We're being practical, Eleanor interjected, her voice calm in that infuriating way wealthy people have when discussing other people's lives. You gave up so much when you married him, darling. Your lifestyle, your opportunities, your position. We can't watch you struggle anymore. I'm not struggling, Helen said, her voice shaking with anger. I'm happy. Why can't any of you see that? But Stephen wasn't even looking at her. His eyes were on me, waiting for me to see reason, to understand that this was the smart play. Men like you understand transactions, he said. This is a good transaction. You walk away with $750,000 and your dignity intact. Much better than dragging this out and ending up with nothing. I set the check down carefully, smoothing it flat. Before I respond, I said, I need to make a call. Would you excuse me for a moment? What are you doing? Helen asked, confused. Making sure everyone understands the full picture, I replied, pulling out my phone. I dialed my attorney and Winters, who I knew would be available despite the evening hour, and had been managing my portfolio for 12 years and knew exactly what to do when I called during family functions. And it's me. I'm at dinner with the Hill family, and something interesting has developed. Could you pull the current ownership structure for Stephen Hill Hotels? Yes, right now. I'll wait. Stephen frowned, irritation creeping into his expression. What does your attorney have to do with any of this? Everything, I said simply. Then and was back, and I put her on speaker. And, could you explain to everyone present the current ownership structure of Stephen Hill Hotels? Her voice filled the room, professional and precise. Stephen Hill Hotels has 200 million shares outstanding. The largest shareholder is Summit Capital Holdings, which owns 102 million shares, representing 51% of the company. Stephen Hill personally owns 28 million shares, or 14%. The remaining 35% is distributed among various institutional investors and public shareholders. Stephen was staring at the phone like it was malfunctioning. What is this? What does Summit Capital have to do with anything? And, I interrupted, could you please explain who owns Summit Capital Holdings? Summit Capital Holdings is a wholly owned subsidiary of Apex Investment Group, which is in turn wholly owned by the individual on this call. The current market value of the Stephen Hill Hotels position is approximately $4.1 billion at today's closing price. The silence that followed wasn't shocked or awkward. It was the silence of a world ending and a new one being born in its place. Helen's mouth had fallen open. Eleanor had gone completely pale. Carl's drink was halfway to his lips, frozen there. Florence looked between me and her brother like she was watching a car accident in slow motion. And Stephen looked like someone had reached into his chest and ripped out everything he thought he knew about the universe. I don't understand, Stephen whispered, his voice barely audible. You're a financial consultant. You give people advice about their portfolios. I do give people advice, I confirmed. I also make investments. Summit Capital has been the primary vehicle for my acquisitions for the past 15 years. Your company was one of my first major positions. N's voice continued through the speaker. To clarify, the individual on this call has majority voting control of Stephen Hill Hotels. He has the authority to make all major corporate decisions, including board composition and executive appointments. In practical terms, he could remove Stephen Hill from his position as CEO with a simple majority vote at the next board meeting. Stephen's face had progressed from white to red. This is impossible. Summit Capital is an institutional fund. I've dealt with their representatives. You've dealt with portfolio managers I hired. I corrected. People I pay to represent my interests without revealing my identity. Every major decision your company has made in the past 8 years, every expansion, every acquisition, every financial restructuring, all of it required my approval. You just never knew you were asking for it. I stood up, walking around the table until I was directly in front of Stephen. 8 years ago, your hotel chain was failing. You'd overextended into secondary markets. Your debt ratios were catastrophic, and traditional lenders wouldn't return your calls. Then Summit Capital started buying your distressed bonds at a premium. Then we converted those bonds to equity. Then we provided the capital for your flagship property renovation. Every time you were about to go under, Summit Capital was there. I was there. But you live in that ordinary house, Eleanor said, finding her voice. You drive that common car. You never spend money on anything. I live in a house that's comfortable, I replied. I drive a car that works perfectly, and I don't spend money on impressing people who measure worth by zip codes and vehicle brands. That's not frugality. That's having nothing to prove. Carl set down his drink with a heavy thunk. You've been lying to us for 4 years. Testing us, I corrected. I wanted to know who you really were when you thought you had all the advantages. Turns out, you're people who try to buy off their daughter's husband for less than 0.5% of what I'm worth. I picked up the check, examining it in the light. $750,000. Stephen, do you know what I could do with this amount? Stephen didn't answer. He was staring at the table, his world collapsing in on itself. I could buy it, frame it, hang it in my office as a reminder of the night you tried to purchase my marriage for a rounding error. Helen was crying now, but not from sadness. From anger, from vindication, from years of watching her family dismiss the man she loved finally coming to a head. You knew, she said to me. You knew this whole time what they were, and you let them keep disrespecting you. I needed you to see it too, I told her. I needed you to understand that when people show you who they are, you should believe them. Your family just showed us exactly who they are. They valued their social status more than your happiness. They thought love could be bought and sold like hotel properties. N's voice came through the speaker again. Should I proceed with the board notifications for Monday's emergency meeting? I looked at Stephen, who had collapsed back into his chair. I looked at Eleanor and Carl, their carefully constructed superiority crumbling. I looked at Florence and Elijah, silent witnesses to their family's humiliation. Yes, I said finally. Schedule the emergency board meeting. It's time for new leadership at Stephen Hill Hotels. The drive home was silent for exactly 12 minutes before Helen spoke. How long have you been planning this? She wasn't angry, just processing everything that had shattered her family's world in under an hour. I wasn't planning anything, I said honestly. I bought into Stephen's company years before we met. It was a solid investment opportunity, nothing personal. Meeting you, falling in love with you, that was completely separate. Beautiful coincidence. But you could have told me any time in 4 years. Would you have believed I married you for you and not for your family's connections? Would you have believed I loved you for who you are, not what you represented? She went quiet, staring out at the Chicago skyline passing by. Maybe not at first, she admitted finally. That's why I waited. I wanted you to know beyond any doubt that I chose you when I had nothing to gain. I wanted your family to show their true character, and tonight they did exactly that. What happens now? To Stephen's company, to my parents? The company will be fine, I assured her. Better than fine, actually. I'm installing professional management who know what they're doing. Stephen will be offered a consulting role if he wants it, though with significantly reduced authority and pay. And my family. That's your choice, Helen. I won't force you to pick between them and me, but I also won't pretend tonight was acceptable. She reached over and took my hand. I choose you. I chose you when I thought you were just a consultant with modest dreams. That version of you loved me without expecting anything in return. That's what matters. We pulled into our driveway, our comfortable house that could fit inside Stephen's penthouse 3 times over. Tomorrow I could buy us a mansion if we wanted. We could move to the Gold Coast ourselves, make Stephen's building look modest. But looking at Helen in the dim light, I realized we didn't need any of that. We're keeping the house, I said suddenly. She smiled for the first time since dinner. Good. I like our life. I like being normal. I like proving happiness doesn't require impressing people who aren't worth impressing. What about the money? $4 billion is substantial to just ignore. We're not ignoring it, I said. We're going to do something meaningful. You're going to expand your nonprofit work. We'll fund community programs that actually help people. Maybe set up scholarships for kids who want business degrees but can't afford them. Kids like you would have been. She asked softly. Kids like I was before my inheritance gave me the chance to build all this. That Monday, the board meeting went exactly as predicted. Stephen was removed as CEO with 73% of votes in favor. He sat at the conference table, diminished and humiliated, while board members who'd spent years praising him now voted to strip his power. The new executive team I'd selected took control immediately, people with genuine hospitality expertise rather than inherited positions. Eleanor called Helen 19 times that day. Helen let every call go to voicemail. Tuesday morning, a letter arrived via certified mail. Inside was a handwritten note from Eleanor. Helen, I don't expect forgiveness. What we did was unforgivable, but I need you to understand we thought we were protecting you. We thought he was using you. We were wrong. So terribly, horribly wrong. Your father is devastated, not about the company, though that hurts. About losing you. About discovering the son-in-law he dismissed saved everything Stephen built. Please, when you're ready, can we talk? No envelopes, no checks. Just a mother who wants to understand the man her daughter married. Helen read it twice, then set it on the counter. Do you think they mean it? I think they're scared, I said. Sometimes fear makes people honest in ways comfort never could. What would you do? I thought carefully. I'd give them one chance. But on our terms, in our home, without the performance. If they can accept us as we actually are, maybe there's hope. Helen picked up her phone and typed a response. Dinner, our place, this Friday. No dress code, no expectations. Just family. She showed me before sending. Too harsh. Perfect, I said. That Friday, Carl and Eleanor arrived looking smaller somehow. Carl wore jeans. Eleanor wore minimal makeup. They'd left their armor behind. Thank you for seeing us, Carl said when I answered the door. We sat around our modest dining table eating pasta Helen made herself. No servers, no crystal, no performance. Just 4 people trying to rebuild something broken. I owe you several apologies, Carl said finally. For every dinner where I made you feel small. For every comment about your job or your house. For that check. He stopped, voice breaking. For treating you like you were worth exactly $750,000 when you're the man who saved Stephen's company and loved my daughter. I appreciate that, I said carefully. But the apology I need to hear is the one you give Helen. She's the one you tried to control. She's the one whose happiness you valued less than social status. Carl turned to his daughter, tears forming. Helen, I'm sorry. I couldn't see what you saw in him. I made you feel like your choice wasn't good enough. You found a man who loves you for who you are, who didn't need your money or name. That's what every father should want, and I almost destroyed it because of pride. Eleanor reached across and took Helen's hand. I spent your whole life preparing you for a certain kind of marriage. When you chose differently, I felt rejected. But you weren't rejecting anything. You were choosing something genuine over something hollow. I'm sorry it took this long to see that. Do you mean it? Helen asked, not pulling her hand away. Because I can't go through another night like last Friday. We mean it, Carl said firmly, and we're prepared to prove it. I'd like to take you to lunch this week, just us. I want to learn about your investment philosophy, your strategy, everything I should have been asking for 4 years instead of dismissing you. I looked at Helen, who nodded slightly. Lunch sounds good, I said. But Carl, understand something. I didn't buy into Stephen's company to control or hurt him. I did it because it was a sound investment. I'm not apologizing for being good at something you didn't know I could do. I wouldn't expect you to, he replied. I'm hoping you'll teach me, because apparently I've been watching my son run a company without understanding who kept it alive. 3 months passed. The transformation at Stephen Hill Hotels was dramatic. The new CEO I'd appointed, a veteran hospitality executive named Patricia Buck, increased profits by 34% in her first quarter. She cut wasteful spending, renegotiated supplier contracts, and actually listened to frontline staff. The stock price climbed 28%. Stephen took the consulting position I offered, mostly because he had no other options. His reputation in the industry was damaged. Word spreads fast when a CEO gets removed by his own largest shareholder. He showed up to the office 3 days a week, reviewed reports, offered suggestions that were politely ignored. Helen flourished. Without the constant pressure from her family, she expanded her nonprofit work. When I offered funding, she initially refused. "I don't want your money making this easier," she said. "I want to earn it." So we compromised. I'd match whatever she raised from other donors, dollar for dollar. Within 2 months, she'd secured partnerships with 3 major foundations. Her program helping low-income families with job training doubled in size. Carl kept his word about lunch. We met every other Wednesday at a diner he'd never have been caught dead in 6 months ago. He asked genuine questions about investment strategy, financial analysis, risk management. I answered honestly, and slowly, something like respect developed between us. He admitted one afternoon over coffee that he'd spent 30 years measuring success by appearances. "Watching you operate taught me I had it backwards," he said. "You built something substantial while I was busy looking substantial." Eleanor came to our house for dinner twice a month. She learned to leave expectations at the door, to just be Helen's mother instead of society matriarch. She even started volunteering at Helen's nonprofit, organizing donation drives with the same intensity she'd once applied to charity galas. Florence called Helen one night, crying. "Elijah left me," she said. "He told me I'm just like Mom and Stephen used to be. Judgmental, shallow, obsessed with status." Helen listened, then said something I was proud of. "You can change if you want to, but it has to be because you want to be better, not because you're scared of ending up alone." Stephen struggled the most. He'd built his entire identity around being the successful hotel magnate, the family golden child. Now he was just another consultant, and not even a particularly valued one. He called me 4 months after the board meeting. "Can we talk?" "Just you and me." We met at a bar downtown. Stephen looked tired, older somehow. "I've been an arrogant fool," he said without preamble. "I treated you like garbage because it made me feel important. I tried to buy you off because I couldn't imagine Helen choosing you over our family's wealth. I was wrong about everything." "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. "But what do you want, Stephen? Honestly, I want to understand how you did it. How you saw potential in my company when I was drowning. How you turned $4 billion into something that looks easy. How you stayed humble when you had every reason to throw it in my face." I studied him carefully. The desperation was gone, replaced by something that might have been genuine curiosity. "Because humility isn't about what you have," I said. "It's about knowing that what you have doesn't define your worth. You ran a hotel company. I invested in it. Neither of those things make us better or worse as people. Can I earn back your respect?" He asked. "Maybe your trust?" "That depends," I said. "Are you asking because you want to rebuild our relationship, or because you want access to my investment expertise?" "Both," he admitted. "But mostly the first one. Helen's my sister. You're her husband. I don't want family dinners to be this painful forever." "Fair enough," I said. "Then prove it through actions, not words. Show me you've learned something from this." Stephen nodded slowly, finished his drink, and left. I wasn't sure if he'd follow through, but at least he'd asked the right question. 6 months after that Friday dinner, my phone rang at 6 a.m. It was Patricia Buck, the CEO I'd installed. "We have a situation," she said. "Stephen showed up at the Miami property last night. There was an issue with a major corporate client threatening to pull their conference booking. Stephen spent 4 hours negotiating, saved the contract, then left without taking credit. I called Stephen immediately. "Patricia told me what you did in Miami." He was quiet for a moment. The client was upset about room assignments for their executive team. It was a simple fix, but it needed someone who understood our history with them. I was there, so I handled it. "You could have made a big deal about it, proven your value to the board." "I don't need to prove anything anymore," he said. "I just wanted to help." That's when I knew he meant what he'd said at the bar. Over the next few months, Stephen became genuinely useful. He'd spot problems before they became crises, mentor younger staff, use his industry connections to benefit the company rather than his ego. Patricia called me after a quarterly review. I hate to admit this, but Steven's actually good at his job when he's not trying to be the star of every show. Helen's nonprofit landed a major government grant, tripling their budget. The foundation I'd set up matched it, and suddenly she was running a multi-million operation. She hired a team of 12 people, opened 2 new locations, helped over 3,000 families in a single year. Watching her thrive and work she genuinely cared about was worth more than any financial return I'd ever generated. Florence showed up at our house one evening unannounced. "I left Elijah," she said, "not because he left me first, but because he was right. I've been shallow and judgmental my whole life. I'm in therapy now, trying to figure out who I am without the family performance." Helen hugged her sister, and I saw years of competitive tension finally breaking. Carl started a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, using connections he'd built over decades to actually help people instead of just networking. Eleanor turned her organizational skills toward Helen's nonprofit, proving surprisingly effective at fundraising when she wasn't doing it for social status. The family dinners at our house became monthly traditions. No pretense, no performance, just 7 people who'd learned hard lessons about what actually mattered. Stephen brought his new girlfriend once, a teacher he'd met at a coffee shop who had no idea who the Hill family was. "She's perfect," Helen whispered to me. "She likes him for him." 1 year after the envelope appeared on that dinner table, Stephen Hill Hotels announced record profits. Patricia Buck was named Hospitality Executive of the Year. Stephen sent me a message that night. "Thank you for saving my company by taking it away from me. I needed to lose everything to figure out what actually mattered." I didn't respond immediately. I let him sit with that realization, let it sink in properly. Then I replied, "You didn't lose everything. You lost control. There's a difference. What you do with that difference is up to you." The next family dinner, Stephen showed up early. He helped set the table without being asked, talked to Helen about her work with genuine interest, asked me about investment strategies like a student instead of defending his ego. Eleanor watched her son with tears in her eyes. "I never thought I'd see him like this," she told me quietly. "Humble, happy, human. People can change," I said, "but only if they want it badly enough." "Did you always believe that?" she asked. "No," I admitted. "Your family taught me to believe it. You proved that facing consequences can lead to growth instead of just resentment." 18 months after the revelation, Forbes published a profile on anonymous investors reshaping industries from the shadows. They mentioned Summit Capital Holdings and its mysterious owner who'd turned distressed assets into billion-dollar positions. The article speculated about identity, motives, strategy. They got most of it wrong. Helen read it over breakfast. "Are you going to correct them?" "Why?" I asked. "Let them speculate. The work matters more than the recognition." She smiled. "For years ago, my family would have killed for this kind of press attention. Now you're actively avoiding it." "Because I learned something your family taught me," I said. "The loudest people in any room are usually compensating for something. The quietest ones are often the most dangerous." Stephen called that afternoon. "Did you see the Forbes piece?" "I did," I said. "Congratulations on not being mentioned." He laughed, genuinely. "That's exactly what I needed to hear. I spent 20 years chasing headlines. Now I'm just trying to do good work." "Patricia tells me you're leading the expansion into the European market," I said. "How's that going?" "Terrifying," he admitted, "but in a good way. I'm learning instead of pretending I already know everything." Helen's nonprofit won a national award for community impact. At the ceremony, she gave a speech that brought the audience to their feet. She talked about measuring success by lives changed rather than dollars accumulated, about finding purpose beyond profit. Afterward, a reporter asked if her husband was the mysterious Summit Capital investor everyone was talking about. Helen smiled. "My husband is a man who taught my family that true wealth is character, not bank accounts. Everything else is just details." Carl retired from his business consulting firm and spent his time mentoring at Helen's nonprofit. He'd review business plans for program participants, help them understand financial projections, give advice that actually helped instead of intimidated. One afternoon, he told me it was the most meaningful work he'd ever done. 40 years building other people's fortunes, he said. Now I'm helping people build their lives. I should have done this decades ago. Eleanor organized a fundraising gala for Helen's nonprofit that raised $2 million in a single night. She used every society connection she'd cultivated over the years, but this time for something that mattered beyond social status. Helen watched her mother work the room with practiced grace and whispered to me, "She's good at this when it's for the right reasons." Florence enrolled in graduate school for social work. She wanted to understand poverty and inequality beyond writing checks to feel charitable. She volunteered at Helen's nonprofit twice a week, doing intake interviews with families who needed help. It stripped away the last of her pretensions. "These people work harder than I ever have," she told Helen one night, "and they have a fraction of what I was handed. How did I not see this before?" Stephen's consulting contract ended, but Patricia offered him a vice president position focused on strategic partnerships. He accepted at half the salary he'd made as CEO. "The money doesn't matter anymore," he told me. "I've got enough. Now I want to be useful." 2 years after the envelope, I liquidated part of my position in Stephen Hill Hotels. The company was stable, profitable, and well-managed. I didn't need controlling interest anymore. I reduced my stake to 25%, still substantial, but no longer dominant. Stephen called when he heard. "Why?" "Because the company doesn't need me anymore," I said. "Patricia runs it better than either of us could. And you've learned enough that your input is actually valuable now. So I'm trusting both of you to keep building something worthwhile." There was silence on the line. Then Stephen's voice, thick with emotion. "Thank you. For everything. For saving the company. For not destroying me when you could have. For giving me a chance to become someone better. You destroyed yourself," I said. "I just made sure you survived long enough to rebuild." 3 years after the envelope slid across that table, Helen and I sat on our back deck watching the sunset. Our comfortable house hadn't changed. We'd renovated the kitchen because we wanted to, not to impress anyone. The neighborhood was the same. Our lives were fundamentally identical to before that Friday dinner, except now everyone knew the truth. Stephen Hill Hotels was worth $12 billion. My reduced stake was still worth $3 billion, but I diversified into education technology, renewable energy, affordable housing development, industries that actually mattered. Stephen had become a genuine leader, respected for competence rather than feared for position. Patricia Buck had transformed the company culture entirely. Employee retention hit record highs. Customer satisfaction scores climbed every quarter. Carl passed away that spring, peacefully in his sleep. At the funeral, dozens of young entrepreneurs he'd mentored showed up to pay respects. He'd spent his final years making up for decades of chasing status by actually helping people build meaningful businesses. Eleanor spoke at his service about how he'd finally understood that legacy wasn't measured in dollars, but in lives touched. Florence finished her graduate degree and took a position at Helen's nonprofit, running their family services division. She'd found purpose in helping others navigate systems she'd never had to think about when wealth insulated her from consequence. The transformation was complete and permanent. Helen's organization now operated in 15 cities, helping over 20,000 families annually. The government grants, foundation support, and matching funds I'd provided had built something sustainable and impactful. She'd proven you could measure success by metrics that actually mattered. Stephen got married to Anne, the teacher who'd known nothing about the Hill family empire. Their wedding was small, genuine, focused on commitment rather than spectacle. He'd learned the difference between performing success and actually living it. At the reception, he pulled me aside. "I need you to know something. That envelope, that check, that whole disaster. Best thing that ever happened to me. I was on track to become a terrible person. You stopped that." "I didn't stop anything," I said. "I just made sure you faced consequences. What you did with those consequences was entirely your choice." He nodded, understanding finally sinking in. Eleanor moved into a smaller home after Carl died, donated most of their estate to Helen's nonprofit. She spent her time volunteering, organizing, using decades of social skills for actual good. She'd finally figured out that influence mattered more than status. That evening on the deck, Helen asked me the question I'd been waiting for. "Do you regret it? Any of it? Letting them humiliate you for years, the revelation, watching them struggle to change?" "Not for a second," I said, "because now I know. I know your family chose growth over resentment. I know you chose me when you had every reason to doubt. I know that being underestimated is sometimes the greatest advantage you can have." "Who are you now?" she asked, smiling. "I'm the same person I've always been. Someone who understands that power without purpose is just noise. Someone who knows that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's living well. Someone who proved that character matters more than appearances. And what did they learn? She asked. That the most dangerous person at any table is the one everyone's ignoring, I said. That wealth without wisdom is just expensive stupidity. That you can't buy respect, only rent it temporarily. That family is about who shows up when it matters, not who shows up when it's convenient. The sun dropped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere across the city, Stephen was probably working late, trying to prove himself through competence rather than authority. Eleanor was organizing another fundraiser. Florence was reviewing case files for families who needed help. And Helen and I were sitting on our deck in our unchanged house, rich in the only ways that actually mattered. The envelope didn't change everything. It revealed everything. And sometimes, that's exactly what people need. Not destruction, but truth. Not revenge, but consequences. Not humiliation, but education. Stephen had tried to buy me for $750,000. Instead, he got a lesson worth billions. He learned that success isn't about controlling everything. It's about building something worthwhile and trusting others to help maintain it. He learned that family isn't about maintaining appearances. It's about showing up honestly, even when honesty is uncomfortable. Most importantly, he learned that the man he'd dismissed for 4 years wasn't simple or naive. He was patient, strategic, and waiting to see if anyone in that family was worth saving. They were. Barely, but they were.